Also ahead tonight in California, the growing debate over marijuana. Now, it seems just about every politician has an idea on how to get the economy going again, but few have generated the reaction that Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger is getting tonight. And here's why. The California governor thinks it's time to talk about making marijuana legal. Now, this is him back in 1977 in the movie Pumping Iron, seemingly smoking a joint right there. 2 years ago, he told the British version of GQ magazine, that is not a drug, it's a leaf. His spokesman downplaying their mark at the time as a joke. But now he's speaking out as governor, favoring a debate over legalization, not because it might reduce violence or make the border safer, but because it might create more revenue. Tom Foreman has more.
Nearly 15 million Americans smoke marijuana each month. The U.S. government says 44% of high school seniors have tried it, and some adults openly use it.
Yes, I do. I'm not afraid to admit that.
Now, amid rumbles that legalizing and taxing marijuana could bring California $1.3 billion a year, lawmakers there are considering just that. A poll shows voters favor it, and the governor wants to talk it over.
And I think that we ought to study very carefully on what other countries are doing that have legalized marijuana.
In New York, the Drug Policy Alliance, encouraged by more than a dozen states that have already approved medicinal marijuana, has long argued for full legalization, comparing the costly war on drugs to prohibition.
The number 1, 2, and 3 factors that brought alcohol prohibition to such a rapid end in 1933 were the Depression, the Depression, the Depression. And what's driving things very quickly right now with ending marijuana prohibition is the recession, and the fear of another depression.
Drug opponents disagree, saying any new revenue could be swallowed by new problems for law enforcement and health officials. Because as the marijuana trade has grown lucrative, the drug itself has been re-engineered to be stronger. Drug Watch International is a non-profit group against legalization.
No question about it. I mean, it's the difference between having maybe a 4-ounce glass of beer versus an 8-ounce glass of Jack Daniels. It's far more potent today than it was back in the 60s.
The president himself doubts the positive economic impact of legalization.
I don't think that is a good strategy to grow our economy.
But the drumbeat to consider it is growing. Tom Foreman, CNN, Washington.
So what do you think? Would making marijuana legal help our economy? Send us a text message with your question to 94553. The message has to start with the letters AC, then a space, then your name and question. If you don't include AC first with a space, we're not going to get the text. Let's talk about the issue right now. Joining us tonight, Jeffrey Myron, a senior economics lecturer at Harvard University. He's for legalization. And against it, John Walters, executive vice president of the Hudson Institute. He's also the former drug czar under President George W. Bush. John, people want to see marijuana legalized, say it's not addictive as other drugs are, that it doesn't increase violence, and by some estimates, legalizing it could bring up to $7 billion of income a year to the government. You don't buy that?
Well, I don't think the facts sustain that. I mean, the fact is that marijuana is the single biggest cause of treatment need among illegal drugs in America, based on some of the same studies you talked about. You just ran an earlier piece in this show about violence in Chicago and the killing of kids that are students in elementary school and middle school and high school. Police made the point, drugs are a factor in this, guns, violence, and out-of-control behavior that's fueled and made worse by drugs. Well, I mean, we already have too many people who suffer from dependency and addiction. Having more people who use only makes that worse. And would the country be better if instead of 14 million users, as you talked about in the setup piece, you had 20, 30, 40, 50 million users?
Jeffrey, what about that? Would legalizing marijuana increase violence?
Absolutely not. There's not a shred of evidence or any good reason to think that legalizing marijuana would increase violence, just the opposite. Most of the violence we associate with marijuana is because when you force a trade underground, people in that trade resolve their disputes with guns rather than with lawyers and advertising the things that people do in legal industries. So it's prohibition that's creating the violence, not marijuana creating the violence. It's just completely preposterous to suggest that marijuana use causes violence.
John, what about the economic argument, though, that this would help our economies?
Well, first, let's talk about the violence. Studies have now shown 60, 70, 80% of the people who are arrested for violent crime have drugs in their body. One of the most prevalent drugs they have in their body are marijuana. There is this view that people who smoke marijuana are kind of cute Cheech and Chong characters from old-time movies. In fact, it's a source of agitation, it's a source of impaired judgment, it's a source of in some cases, making people whose behavior is already erratic get very erratic. So the greater potency has something to do with that. The revenue that you would get from having tens of millions of more marijuana users is going to be offset by the cost it is to society, the cost not only in addiction treatment, but also the lost productivity of those individuals, the damage it does to families. Think of it this way. Many of our families have experience with this. They have loved ones who have suffered from substance abuse, many of them from marijuana dependency, many polydrug dependency that started with marijuana, many alcoholism and marijuana. How many of those families think America or their family or their community would be better off with more of that?
Jeffrey, what do you think?
The key assumption that's being made by Mr. Walters is just completely not supported by the evidence, is that legalizing it would lead to some dramatic increase in use. The evidence suggests that there would be at best modest increases in use, and those increases that would occur would be from responsible, moderate users, just as we observe with legal alcohol. For alcohol, we have a huge range of potency. The vast majority of people don't consume extremely potent forms of alcohol, and they don't do the less potent ones to excess. The vast majority use responsibly. That's exactly what we should expect, and what the evidence suggests would be true of marijuana.
John, we've got a text question from John in Pennsylvania. He asked, won't legalizing marijuana get petty offenders out of our already crowded jail system?
Well, in fact, there is a wide-held view that possession offenders are a big part of the jail system. In fact, there's 0.3% of those in state prisons, the largest prison population, are there for simple possession of marijuana. Most people are there for violent crimes. Drugs and violence do fit together. But let me go back to the professor's point about there won't be more use. In California, where medical marijuana has been used as a kind of wedge issue, a kind of phony effort to try to say that, oh, it's only going to go to people who are sick. It's not going to people who are sick. In fact, in San Francisco, as has been reported in the news, there are now more marijuana dispensaries than there are Starbucks in downtown San Francisco. That's more use under a regime that's already halfway disassembled. If you took the lid off altogether, there are 100 million people who drink alcohol once a month or more frequently, and there are about 13 million who are needing treatment for alcoholism. There are 20 million who use an illegal drug. Most of them use marijuana once a month or more frequently, and a third of them need treatment.
We're almost out of time. I just want to give Jeffrey the chance to respond to that. Jeff?
Well, the mere fact that these medical marijuana dispensaries may be dispensing widely to people who are using for reasons other than medicinal, is undoubtedly valid, but if there's been any increase in use, then where's the surge in violence? California is just as peaceful and just as normal a place as it's been for a long time, despite this alleged surge in use from the medicinal marijuana, so that doesn't support the claims being made by the prohibitionists in any way, shape, or form.
We do have to end it there. I'm sorry. It's a fascinating debate and one we want to continue having. John Walters, appreciate your time, and Jeffrey Meyer as well. Thank you.